Thank you, folks, for joining us on our webinar. We're doing our series on one CFO to another, and we have Glenn Hopper with us. I kick off with a quick introduction about me, and then I'll hand it off to Glenn to introduce himself, and then we can go over how ChatGPT can actually be useful for finance, and that's our main topic for today. So I'm Sid. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SpendFlow. SpendFlow helps companies buy, manage, and optimize all their SaaS spends with guaranteed savings. We've been working with some of the largest companies in the world and millions of SaaS spends across them as well. And we've been lucky enough to meet folks like Glenn along the way who've educated us on how finance leaders actually think about different technology shifts. So I'll hand it off to Glenn to introduce himself, and we can take it away.
Yeah, I'll go real quick so we can go into the content. I am a really geeky finance guy who loves the tech stuff, and I've been a CFO in the startup to scale up space for about the past 15 years. I've been in finance for over 20, and I came to this honestly, the technology side, in that necessity is the mother of invention. I had to, like all of us, small teams, small company, trying to present like a bigger company, trying to get stuff out there with less information. So yeah, I came to technology because I needed it to help me do my job. So and that's been going on about 20 years. So I love this stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Glenn. One, there's AI. Second, there's machine learning. And then there's deep learning, right? It gets really confusing for folks out there. And honestly, even I get confused at times. So just as a primer for the audience, right? Can you give us like a little bit of a quick deep dive into what's the difference between all three?
Sure. So AI, and I love this graphic, by the way. So AI is the overall broad field. And for years, when people said AI, they pictured, data from Star Trek or the HAL 9000 from Space 2001. But AI, artificial intelligence in general, is a field that tries to replicate human knowledge with machines. And it includes, so before ChatGPT, I mean, AI has been around for a long time, and AI includes machine learning and deep learning that we'll talk about, but also robotic process automation, expert systems, rule-based systems that have been out there for years. It's just none of them have taken the world by storm the way that this particular language model has. And so machine learning is a subset underneath AI. And machine learning it's algorithms that are very good at, they learn patterns and make predictions. So spam filters, Netflix movie recommendations, Amazon product recommendations, those are all using machine learning algorithms. And the key thing, this is going to be important later in our presentation, they learn patterns and make predictions. So put a pin in that because we're going to come back to it. And then within that, there's deep learning, which is artificial neural networks, which is a type of algorithm that is actually based on, it's modeled after the human brain. It actually, it uses neurons and a bunch of calculus and forward propagation and back propagation to train a model. But yeah, so deep learnings are a subset of that. And I guess I would say, and I know we'll talk about it more, but ChatGPT is a large language model that is a type of deep learning.
Got it. Makes sense. And so in that vein, right? Like you'd actually alluded to this when you explained what machine learning is. There's regression models as well as classification models in machine learning. So just as a quick primer, especially because we're getting into the use cases of how it's going to be useful for finance. So this is very important for folks to know, and when they're looking for tools as well.
Yeah, and so this is a great, I love this slide. And I love to simplify machine learning down to this. Machine learning basically does two things. The first is regression, which takes time series data or any series of data and goes through it and makes, just like we would in Excel where we run a linear regression. So machine learning does that to make forecasts and predictions based on historical trend analysis. And that's one part of what machine learning does. And the other is classification. So here we see, if we're looking at the specific temperature, we can go with the trend and pick and make a prediction on the number. But the other would be in classification. It's like we have all these data points and all these data points, or all these pictures of cats and these pictures of dogs, and it classifies whether it's a cat or a dog. So if you think about that, is how simple, and even ChatGPT is it's a prediction model. So really, that's the best way to think about machine learning. It does two things. It either makes predictions or classifies items.
Yeah, makes sense. And these the piece right after this as well, right? Which is there is, again, what's the difference between ML and deep learning? Because this is the confusing piece, right? Because a lot of people assume that I need a lot of data in order to be effective, right? And it's partially true and partially right. So partially wrong. So this, I think, will give folks a great idea of like where some use cases can be, especially for finance.
Yeah, so this is, when I look at these two, at machine learning and deep learning on this slide, it makes me think of supervised versus unsupervised learning. Yep. So the machine learning model on the left, I see as you have all this labeled data. You say, these are pictures of cars, and yep. You run them through the algorithm and say, these are cars, these are cars, these are cars. And then after you have trained the model, you run another picture through and you say, is this a car? And it's able to, based on its training data, say, yes, that's a car. Well, with deep learning, you get to the same spot, but the way you get there, it's a lot more magical, and there's a lot of black box things that are happening under the hood here. You can just put in pictures of anything, they're not labeled. And as you run them through the deep learning algorithm, that this is called unsupervised learning, you the model learns again through all that calculus and stuff I mentioned earlier, what to identify based on features that we don't even know exactly what they are, what it's identifying there. Because it goes through the type of network, and then it spits out, once it's trained, is this a car or not a car?
Yeah, and just to your point, Glenn, ChatGPT is essentially a deep learning model. So you can feed it data to become better. At the same time, it's pretty good by itself, just because it's trained on like data up till 2021, if I'm not mistaken. 2019 of the API data set, ChatGPT has 2021 data. You can actually pay for it, get your plugins, and actually get live data as well. But it's a give and take. So you're essentially feeding it data, and now it's part of the network, right? So it's very important to know the risks involved in using that as well, which is what I'll come to next as well, right? Like, so what is ChatGPT, right? So I think I alluded to this already, but Glenn, I know you'll do a better job than I will.
Yeah. So here's the thing: like when you hear talk about is ChatGPT sentient, and there was that Google researcher who said that the model he was talking to was sentient. But this is the amazing thing to think about ChatGPT. Remember, I said AI is either regression, prediction, or classification. Yep. ChatGPT is just predicting what word's going to come next. It was trained to basically, think of it as reading the whole internet. It's not really the whole internet, but it's billions and billions of yeah. So it's like everything from Wikipedia, everything from Reddit, and it just has this massive data set that it has a series of words, and then it's just probability. What word is most likely to come next? And it's a feed forward model. So when it starts answering a question, it doesn't have an end in mind. It's just saying, okay, this was the question. So based on that prompt, we think it's likely that these words are going to be next. And then it just builds on that as it gets through, and then it completes its output. So, that's very different than sentience, but it's pretty amazing that we're using statistical probability to construct language.
And just for the audience as well, you can use it for prediction, but you can actually now use ChatGPT for all analytics as well. They essentially have released like a data science piece, which is you can actually upload a CSV file of the data that you need to analyze. It'll actually analyze it for you and spit out what you need from it as well. And it's in like, what would take me probably 5 hours to do would spit out in essentially like 20 minutes. Right. So it's and it can actually do classification as well, Glenn. So just for so it can actually do classification and predictions as well. So if I train it to say, hey, this is what X, it's a white car and a black car, it actually can do it itself. So it's pretty crazy how powerful that is.
Yeah, that the code interpreter plugin is what's coming in. I'm on the wait list. I'm waiting to get my hands on it.
Yeah.
So I'll let you know when I do. So.
Yes. Now to the juicy piece, which is how is this going to affect everyday lives of finance leaders and the finance teams across the world, right? Because this and this is like a very nice chart that we came across that you shared from HBR on where to actually go and deploy this, where's the demand for it, and how the risks are. So maybe just like a quick primer from you, Glenn, on this would be helpful.
Yeah, I think this is an important, I mean, it's a very simple 2x2 matrix, but it's very important because right now I don't even know with using, certainly the production off the shelf ChatGPT, but, there's demand, there's all kinds of things that we want to do, but there is risk. And we'll talk about that throughout the presentation. And we need to be aware of the risks. And when we're picking what projects we want to use generative AI for, this Harvard Business Review slide is kind of perfect. So think about that top left quadrant. It's high demand and low risk. And so in that, you can see, okay, right now we could use ChatGPT to do some marketing stuff, some copy editing, and do maybe code reviews and ideation. Anyone who's messed around with ChatGPT knows it's great at that. But then when you start thinking of the higher risk, maybe lower demand, that's the other end of the spectrum, very specialist technical advice like finance and accounting and things that you're reporting to the SEC. We're not there yet, audits and compliance. We're not there yet with using generative AI. I think it's going to come quicker than a lot of us, even the evangelists, even than we think, but we're not quite there yet. But I think this is a great matrix to think about. You're not going to throw everything at ChatGPT right now. What are some things that make sense as you build trust with it?
Yeah, and it's important to note, because I think the first use case that we're talking about as well is a very it's a painful one that we all go through. So I'm guessing that's why it's number one. So Glenn, what's your take on why you think this is the first piece that actually is going to get eaten up by AI?
Yeah, and so I'm going to say with this and with the other tools we're going to look at, a lot of people might look at this and say, well, I'm using RPA today to do this. I'm already, doing this. Why do I need some new tool to do it? But anyone who's set up an RPA process, it's amazing once it's working, but setting it up takes forever. And if anything, and if anything changes, because it's going more on, locations of where things are in the invoice than I'm actually comprehending it. So the setup is a problem, and if anything changes, there's a problem. So we're going to talk about these. There's a lot of automations out there that are doing it today, but let's look at it with an eye towards the AI piece of it and how it can improve. So invoice processing today, the automations, it's RPA, it's rule-based. There is opportunity for machine learning here, and potential for LLMs.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious as well, right? Like, so when we were having a discussion on, hey, what are the use cases that we should talk about in this webinar? The first thing I think both of us lined up on was invoice processing, if I'm not mistaken. And we're like, hey, I think this is something that AI can do. And you mentioned RPA doing it in some degree or form right now. I'm just like curious as well, like, do you, is it also because the risk of automating invoice processing is a little bit lower, then that's why it's become one of the first ones?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, last thing you want to do is overpay someone and have to get money back from them. But and I think it depends on what systems people are currently using. So invoice processing, to me, I just think about as they come in and the way that they go through the approvals and everything and the workflows. It never, no matter how hard you try to set it up in your ERP, it seems like there's a lot of reinventing the wheel, and it's a lot of manual intervention, and there's a lot of, just as RPA could make a mistake. I think automation, over time, we've seen it does make fewer mistakes than humans do. So, the systems that are there are doing a pretty good job. It can get better, and I think it can get more conversational as well, where,
Ah,
it in the comprehension of it as it comes through, because think about, first it was OCR wasn't great. It couldn't really interpret things.
no,
OCR is great now. RPA is pretty good now, but
yeah,
it's an evolution in here. So once you digitize, and so many of our invoices are already digital, which
yep,
makes it even easier. But
easier.
once you digitize, and then you've got a large language model that can go through and get the context of it and everything and not have to look at certain spots, then not only can it process the invoice for you, you can ask it questions about the invoice without having
Oh,
to,
yes.
if you get a multi-page invoice and you just want to say, what are the line items for, whatever it is. So there's a lot of opportunity here for generative AI to improve this.
Yeah, I'll just pause here for the audience as well. Folks, please feel free to ask any questions you need in the Q&A section. Glenn and I can definitely pick them up and answer. I know there's a question about from Jacob. I'll let my team answer that because they're the ones who are running the show right here. But thank you so much for asking, Jacob. And obviously we're available on LinkedIn as well if you ever need us for anything else. But just to the next particular use case that we were talking about, Glenn. This is also a really sweet one, which we come across a lot, and there's a bunch of tools that kind of did this before LLMs existed, which is they kind of automated some piece of this. Collections were automated, payables, receivables, all of it, right? Like, how do you think it's going to change with AI?
So think about this. Like when every one of these that we talk about, I want to think about the front end, how we interact with it,
Yes.
and what's happening on the back end. So AP and AR, there are tools that built right into ERP systems, built into CRMs. There's tools out there that do a lot of automation for AP and receivables, and we've got our workflows set up. But it's what's going to change is how we interact with them. It's so that we don't have to learn, how to write certain, to get certain reports in our ERP system, or how to, slice and dice information. When you have an interface that you can interact with just as you would another person. So if you're, an executive in a company and you're trying to get an understanding of where your AP is and where your AR is, and you won't have questions about it, that is the kind of thing that you currently have to work with a person on. But
Yeah.
with generative AI, you can actually interact with the system itself to get those questions. So, AP and AR, we see them in dashboards right now. It's just a matter of, and computers are great at this, match an invoice to a purchase order. It's easy to search on the amount and all that. So you don't need complex AI to do that. It's just, we're looking at the next wave of interacting with the data, being able to consolidate from different areas and match this stuff in a way that is not just a very strict rule-based item.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what do you see as like the biggest risk when it comes to deploying this and the AP and the AR side, right? Like I'm guessing AP, like you said, hey, there's a risk of overpaying vendors or underpaying them, but AR, you gotta be collecting all the time, right? Like that's the golden rule of finance. So I'm just guessing, like, what do you see as risk over there?
Yeah. So right now, I've used a lot of these AR automation tools, and they're great. You set up, here's the due date. So on the due date, we send this reminder. And then as the invoice gets older, you have a rule-based system that says when it's 15 days late, you send this message and send that. And so I picture if, so these are very rule-based and they're very one-sided. You send the note out. If the client replies, you've got to interact with them. I could see the temptation to say, let a large language model interact with them as if it's so there's the risks at 2 points at AR. One, if it erroneously flags something as late, or if there's some kind of client dispute or whatever, and you don't have a human in the middle, and that the automated system, whether it's AR or not, goes out and interacts with the customer on something erroneous, that could make a situation pretty bad. So, thinking about that part of it. And then I want to mention this, and we don't have to mention it on each one of these, but we do need to think about with all of this, everything we're talking about with the digital information and using AI, it's for 90% of the people, we're talking about cloud-based information. So there are security risks with all this, with the pay, with any part of these. It is, it's everybody trusts that Google is going to be safe, or that wherever we're putting our information, or that our own Citrix server or whatever is going to be safe, but it is exposed out on the cloud. So think about the LLM tools and any AI and any digital automation tool as there is a cyber security risk to it.
And then there's also even more so than normal, right? Because if you use an open source model and you're training your data on that open source model, your data is now available to everybody. So it's something for you to be very well aware of. Like if we're connecting to OpenAPI and their APIs are essentially used to train our models, and you're feeding it data, that's OpenAPI now has access to our data as well. Just like, so that's a massive, like you have security breaches from like PII. You don't remain SOC 2 compliant anymore. You don't remain ISO compliant anymore. So there are a bunch of security risks, which is very key for everybody here to know about.
Yeah, very, very good point. And I am telling everyone right now, do not put proprietary information into the publicly available OpenAI, ChatGPT, or any of the Bing or Google, whatever their models. Just proprietary information, it needs to keep the same security measures. You wouldn't post it all on a blog. Don't upload it here now. We're going to move through this, and there's going to be closed environments that are more suitable for company information. But we're not there yet.
Yeah. And I'm guessing like this was the one that you're really gung-ho about, which is bank reconciliations. I'm guessing you probably don't like doing it, so that's why you're probably gung-ho about it. But can you tell the audience why you think this is like the most low-hanging fruit that you think you could go after?
Yes. So I did actually see a demo from a startup a couple of weeks ago it's not in production yet, but they're getting pretty good results doing bank recs with large language models through. Let me go ahead and throw this out there. So first off, it hasn't been as long as you might think for someone who's been a CFO for 15 years since I've actually done a bank rec. And if anyone knows, I mean, as long as everything that's in there matches it up, it's fairly quick. But it's when you find those items, whether it was a income that wasn't recorded or expense that wasn't properly recorded. I mean, you have to go back through invoices, receipts, emails, diary entries, trying to find where all this information is, and it's very time consuming. And there are tools out there, again, they're not production ready, but they're so close, that are deploying agents on behalf of the user. So there's AutoGPT, there's Hugging GPT, there's Baby AGI. And the amazing thing with these is it takes ChatGPT or Bard or whichever language model you're using, and instead of humans prompting it, you set up these artificial intelligence agents that do prompts. So think about when if you're doing a bank rec, you find some charge that says, McD something, and you have no idea what it is. So the first thing you might do is like copy and paste it into a search engine and Google, what is McDLO, whatever the weird non-word that showed up on the charges. And you could have agents actually go out and do this for you. So there's rule-based systems out there right now that try to classify charges and tie them and everything. But it's when you have those discrepancies that takes all the time to finish the bank reconciliation. But if in the background, you had these AI agents going out and doing this research for you, and then again, we're at trust but verify, not automatically coding them, but giving you a list that says, here's what we think is this charge is for, this is how sure we are of it. We're very sure, we're wild guess here, but it's that 80-20 rule. If AI can capture 80% of those unmatched charges or deposits, then you only have to do 20%. That's just a way it's going to make it that much easier.
Yeah. And I think like again, with this piece, right? You said trust but verify. Like I'm guessing,
Yeah.
stating you'd run. I'm guessing the risk over here is that, hey, I go do this. If I do it wrong, I can always go restate it. So the risk is a little bit lower. And that's why I'm guessing it's an easier way to easier use case to deploy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. And sorry, I think there was a question from Katie on which AI tools to particularly look out for. I think Glenn and I had this discussion, and we expected this question to come in. We unfortunately can't like maybe prescribe a particular tool, and that's why we're talking about the use cases for them. But we will be saying, because the space is evolving very quickly, right? So if we were to say, hey, go use these guys, it wouldn't be right to the vendor or to you, because a lot of this hasn't been in production yet. It hasn't been tested in production yet. A lot of these are still in beta. They're still in pilots. So it's not. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it's already there, but it's going to get there, and you should be on the lookout for tools that solve these particular use cases. Is the goal over here. Glenn, if you can add to it as well.
Yeah, and I do want to add, and exactly what you said, that I mean, these are brand new tools. The space is evolving so quickly. And I'm even the ones that I talk to, I'm, with some startup out of Silicon Valley that just, sprung up overnight and has this really cool tool. I'll play around with it with demo data right now, but I'm still, there's no one yet that I'm ready to put production data into. And it's that trust but verify. And or I don't even know, for a brand new startup, I'm not even at the trust stage. I'm just, let's figure this out and find out. I do think if I were, Oracle or Intuit or a big provider of these services, I would in-house, hopefully you would think that they've had plenty of R&D that they can roll it out. So if you have a big known entity that's out there doing this now, that they can include it, and okay, well, I can trust Oracle, to whatever extent you can trust a cloud-based application, because I've used them for 20 years or whatever. So, but that's not to say, and I think there need to be standards, and everything needs to be taken cautiously and carefully, and whatever due diligence you need to do on these companies is going to be very important.
Yeah, and we have like Katie, just for you as well, we can maybe publish like a checklist that on what are those risks, and what are the things that you need to look for when you're buying a new AI tool, right? Like, so which model they're being trained on, what are the data sharing, what is the security standards that they're following. There's like a checklist, and that checklist is evolving very quickly, but I think we can be like a live checklist, and like we'll bug Glenn to get his thoughts on it as well. Awesome. So just as the next piece is fraud detection. I'm guessing this is like a lot of folks are already using a bunch of classification models for this, Glenn. So I think it's moving into the predictive world, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So this is what I was talking about. These next three that we're going to talk about, they're, I would say, higher risk. They're also high demand, but fraud detection, like you said, is being used today. And this goes back to what I said about machine learning is excellent at learning, taking massive data sets, learning patterns, making predictions. And fraud detection is a perfect use case for it. So, there's, I think of decision trees and fraud detection, and you can have it, go through the workflow of it. And there is AI out there for it now. That does that, and I think is doing a very good job. I mean, think about how many times even personally, you get a notification from your credit card company or whatever, hey, this is suspected fraud. And there's false positives and false negatives that fall into that too. But just the amount of fraud that's out there, I would rather have a few of those than just not have this in place. So I think this is something that's been tested for several years. It is out there now, and it is machine learning driven, and it's going to pick up on things that we as humans would never think about with fraud. But again, just like with all these other applications, I'm not ready to just turn it over to our robot overlords and say, don't even involve a human here. Just you immediately go and
Yeah,
contact this and report this or whatever. You know, I think that there is, but it flags them, identifies them, and then greatly reduces the amount of data that humans have to put their eyes on to
but
detect fraud.
but like one thing that I'd add is we work with a lot of fintech companies. We work with a lot of financial institutions, and yes, they are training their own models for fraud detection using open source models that are available and with the data that they have, which is going to be extremely powerful moving forward, right? So it's something that folks are already on the lookout for. But like, I'll move to the next one as well. So this one's another again, little bit higher risk, I would say. Definitely lower risk than fraud detection, but it's something that we deal with every single day and requires a lot of work all the time, right? So I see the use case for this probably as a CEO. This is like the most painful thing that I have to go through. So I'm like a little bit more close to this, but Glenn, I'll let you go.
Yeah, so this one is near and dear to my heart. I think at my core, I'm an FP&A guy. My first days in data science was trying to find models that could do better financial forecasting. And if you think about the complexities, especially in the startup space where I've been, of trying to, there's so many variables and so many features. And this is something that I figured out early on gave me so much more power than you can do in Excel. I mean, if you think about whether it's financial forecasting for a company or any time series data, you know, trying to predict stock prices or
Yeah,
thing that happens over time. And just think about the complexity of it. If you've got, you know, you take your time series data and you've got to detrend it and deseasonalize it and sort of even it out and then put those trends back in, and you've got your cyclical variations and your random variations and trying to make a forecast, you know, based on this historical information, but also, you know, that there's these features and variables that are going to happen in the next year, and trying to factor all this in, it's very hard to do predictions
all of them.
without, yeah. And so to me, financial forecasting, when you incorporate machine learning and you can use tools like exponential smoothing and long-term, short-term memory algorithms that are great for time series data. I mean, it just gives you so much more power. And then you can do things like Monte Carlo simulations. And right now you have to have a team of data scientists to do this kind of
Yep.
stuff for you. But to your earlier point, now that you have the code interpreter plugin that's just about to come out, all this data science stuff that we used to need teams for, or at least, you know, a couple of specialists, are going to be like that through a large language model. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
and I've seen a couple of demos on what the code interpreter does when you upload a CSV of financial data, and the amount that it can do just in the blink of an eye coming out. This is, financial forecasting is going to be exciting to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be super exciting, especially because like you can actually converse with it to answer the questions. So it doesn't have to be like synchronous meetings all the time. And like as you distribute it within departments, the department heads can now self-serve. They don't need to be dependent on finance teams, right? Like so, and that makes frees up time for finance all around. I think the last but final use case, I think, is like a it's something that we all don't want to deal with, but we have to. So what's your take on compliance monitoring?
Yeah, so this is, to me, would be the perfect application of a fine-tuned model. If you took a basic LLM that's trained and has the basic skills of ChatGPT or Bard, and then you fine-tuned it on GAAP data, SEC data, IFRS data, you know, accounting standards, and all the documentation that we would learn as accountants going to school and studying for various exams. If you could train an LLM on that kind of data, then when it comes to compliance and reporting and tax planning and all that you do, then you have a true accounting expert or compliance expert, in this case, that you can interact with in natural language. This is going to be big. And that there was some of our listeners may have seen this the other day, but there was a report that ChatGPT failed an accounting exam or did worse than people in most components of it. And I'm okay with that because ChatGPT is a generalist, but that's where the fine tuning comes in. And then there's a whole new series of things that are going to happen with vectors and LangChain and in ways that you can interact directly. But I think those are going to be computationally expensive and not as efficient. I think that someone's going to have to do something similar to what Bloomberg GPT did and come up with a tool that is for compliance. And I think it would sell. And I've already seen a compliance tool out there particularly for the RIA space, but it's all coming so fast. Again, with the caveat, you need to be sure you can trust it before you can use it. But even as an aid right now, I think this is going to be an area that could really see a lot of improvement from AI.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to just pause here. Like, I know we've gone through a lot of these use cases. I want to open up for folks here. Feel free to ask any questions. I think we have a couple of minutes left of Glenn's time, and would love for you folks to ask anything else that we can help with. But want to also, it's also a cautionary tale, right? Like we want you to be careful when you actually start experimenting with this. Please go experiment, but just don't, just make sure that you're not using production data along the way, right? Like, and go do this, and there will be a bunch of use cases. What are the things that AI can't do forever in finance? Not sure that I think, but I'm guessing the question is, what can't AI do, right? What is something that only finance can do?
Yeah, so I think I've been on so many of these webinars and podcasts, and I've actually went back and found some predictions I made that were very wrong. So I always hate, being a futurist is a losing game. I think the better question, it's hard to picture as quickly as this is moving and the massive build that we've had for years underneath, it's hard to find an area that AI won't impact. I mean, when you look at that Goldman survey that said something, 300 million jobs will be impacted by AI, and even Sam Altman and OpenAI say 80% of the workforce is going to be impacted by it. There's the thing that we thought until very recently was knowledge workers would be the last to be impacted, and that it would sort of start at more manual skill, less mindful jobs. But now with the LLMs, we're seeing the mindful jobs are going to go first. So I think that the thing we all need to be thinking about is how we can supercharge ourselves using this as a tool, and then really focus on those human elements that you hear people say, oh, well, AI will never be able to do strategy or I think we're already seeing seeds of that. So there's not anything that I would just put up a stop sign and say, no way AI could ever do this.
Yeah, I think there's another question. Really interesting, the impact you can provide, taking the risk into consideration for a standard finance person. If they try to do it yourself, would you recommend trying out yourself or find software provider that can do it for you? And if you would like to try to implement something yourself to play around, what would you recommend, right? Like, I'm guessing, do you play around with it yourself, or do you use a software vendor? I can actually take this primarily because we help companies buy and manage their software. Jacob, depends on the size and scale of the organization that you're in, and which use case you want to try, right? If it's low risk and something you want to play around with, just go play around with it, right? But just don't use any production data. That's our only piece, right? Don't use any production data. Make up data for all you care. You can call it Acme Inc. and then run that data set and analysis on that. But if you have a particular use case and you know that that's very, very painful for you, and it can help you increase margins, improve growth in some way or form, then definitely move with a software vendor, because they're probably using their own model, and it's based on your data as well. So you have complete control and security, and all of that is taken care of, and they're delivering the solution. They're not delivering the how as well. So I guess that's my short answer. But Glenn, if you have like any other recommendation for them to play around with, what do you recommend?
Yeah, so I'm not going to waste time looking for it here, but maybe we can send it via LinkedIn or something.
Oh,
I did
yeah.
a project. ChatGPT will write code for you. I used made up company financials, but one of the first projects I did in ChatGPT was try to make an FP&A tool. It's very basic, and I'm not saying use mine, but if you wanted to play around with something like this, maybe it'll inspire you to do something better. But I had ChatGPT wrote 100% of the code for this tool. I created an open Colab project, used a SQLite database, and was able to play around and see some of this. And that's even before this code interpreter plugin comes out. So I think if you don't use production data, get in there and let ChatGPT write some code for you and see what you can build.
Yeah, I think Medha can share it right after the webinar as well, Jacob. So you'll have it with you. And I think Naman had a quick question. I think will be the last question before we for the night. So I think it said, as you said, data is the key for AI in finance, right? And how do you foresee companies building their own LLMs instead of using OpenAI's APIs, right? Like, so how do you actually build trust in an LLM model that you think that you're planning on using for these particular use cases?
Yeah, and this goes back to the what you were saying earlier about do you buy the software or build internally? There are applications out there right now. Hugging Face is a website that has, you have to have technical know-how to be able to do this, but there are much smaller language models out there that people are running locally. I don't mean on your desktop computer, but on company servers that can, and then using LangChain, using vectors, being able to run these queries. This is still, it's cheaper than fine tuning a model, but if you're going to be using them at scale, you've got to have these NVIDIA chips and all that. So there's a lot, a lot that goes into it, but you'll see enterprises, especially larger companies, using their own LLMs internally that are not out on the cloud, that are just behind their firewalls.
Yeah, and that makes sense as well, really, because your data is gold right now as well. Fantastic. I think we can we're right on time. Thank you, Glenn, for taking the time. This is truly, like, I learned a lot just from this experience. I think where the audience is essentially asked for your blog post to come out, what you're writing soon on how do you actually go live with all of this. So we'll keep bugging you for it, and we'll distribute it to the team whenever they ask for it. And thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you folks for joining in our event. Awesome. I think okay, great. I think we're almost done. Fantastic. Glenn, thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Sid.
Thank you. Bye.